Reserve, were talking about the dangers of deflation, why we didn't want to wind up like Japan, and what we might have to do to avoid that.
Ben Bernanke, a professor who had just been hired by the Fed, said, we're not going to let prices fall. We are going to create enough dollar bills to lift the prices of everything by a little.
So, because of this fear of deflation, we didn't have a deflation. The Fed continued to follow an expansionary policy.
And the Fed proceeded to press down this rate of interest it controls, the so-called federal funds rate, all the way down to 1%. You could scarcely see it, it was so tiny.
I really think that was looking at the wrong thing, but all of that led to, as you know, a big boom and a big bust.
If you allow interest rates to remain unusually low for a long period of time, you are creating the environment in which a bubble or in which a rapid credit expansion can occur.
Deep down, monetary policy screws around with our heads, and it influences the amount of risk you and I are prepared to take. If we think interest rates are going to be low for a long time, we're comfortable borrowing money. If we think interest rates are going to be very high for a long time, that induces us to feel like leaving that money in the bank.
We're going to lower interest rates to find speculators who said, well, let me take a shot at building condos. At a higher rate, they may not take that chance.
And part of that was intentional on the part of the Fed to get us all to take more risk than we would otherwise take.
I love that house. Plus the schools.
The kids are 3 and 1.
They're gonna grow up. What?
This listing is special, John. You guys can do this.
Do this.
Okay.
Are you kidding me?
And as the housing bubble built up, cheap credit sort of sustained it. The fuel for the subprime mortgage crisis was the accommodative monetary policy by the Fed.
The Federal Reserve stands prepared to maintain a highly accommodative stance of policy for as long as needed to promote satisfactory economic performance.
Greenspan had been hitting home runs for so long that he thought he couldn't fail. Determined to get growth at any cost, his plan was to swap one boom for another and juice the economy with low interest rates. But far from solving the problem, it would trap the Fed in a vicious cycle from which it has still not escaped.
We took rates down really low. They haven't been that low for 46 years, and they never stayed that low that long.
By lowering the price of money, the Fed was raising the prices of things bought with borrowed money.
We favored real estate, for example, because we didn't want to see people out of jobs. Well-intentioned, but the consequences are we created the incentives to borrow. And we brought households to debt levels that no one would have imagined 20 years ago, not just 50 years ago.
And when you looked at it that way, you would say, uh-oh. But Greenspan was theory man. His theory said you didn't get nationwide recessions in housing.
The Fed thought its policies were safe, provided inflation remained low. But had it been measuring inflation the way it did during the Volcker years, inflation would have been far higher. Not only were exploding house prices excluded from the Fed's new calculation, but rising food and gas costs as well.
So the Fed kept filling up the punch bowl. And as opposed to going into inflation of goods prices, it went into an inflation of asset prices. That's inflation in the same way, but it's not called inflation. So if the stock market goes up and doubles, we don't say, oh my God, there's been inflation. Or if housing prices double, we don't say, oh my God, there's been this enormous inflation. We say, oh, how much richer we are. But the problem is, we're not richer. It's simply an illusion of richness.
President Bush signed a housing bill, which was part of his ownership society, and he said how good it was when people had houses.
New home construction
the highest in almost 20 years. Home ownership rates, the highest ever.
But they didn't have any investment in the house. They didn't have any equity in the house. So what did they own? They didn't own anything. They owned a mortgage, which if things got bad, they could default, and they did.
Now, there are a lot of people who want to criticize the American household for being dumb.
Americans borrowed too much, in part because they did not understand how to save prudently, how to borrow responsibly, and they did not understand fully that pension values and house prices will not always rise.
I think that's mistaken. I think I would never short the intelligence of the American consumer. Sort of the collective wisdom, I think, is usually pretty good. We gave them really low interest rates in 2003, 2004. Guess what? They borrowed a lot of money.
So it looked like the Fed had done a great job, and they were kind of patting themselves on the back.
Our strategy of addressing the bubble's consequences, rather than the bubble itself, has been successful.
It was not a good year for optimistic predictions. Greenspan had kept rates so low for so long that he turned an overheated housing market into the greatest credit bubble in history. It would alter the course of the American economy for decades to come.
You know, the way a healthy economy grows is people earn money and they go out and spend it. The way an unhealthy economy grows is people borrow money and they go out and spend it. The U.S. in 03, 04, 05, 06 was phantom recovery. It was all borrowed money. So instead of building factories that produce income, we wind up building condos that really don't produce anything. And then we build too many condos. So this great moderation has only been keeping the economy going, keeping the economy going, keeping the economy going, at the same time as making it less and less productive, until there was not enough income supporting that debt. And it implodes on itself.